by for Wyoming Hookin Huntin Outdoors with your host, Drew Kirby.
Hey, this is Luke Holmes.
I am Morgan Wallen.
I'm Riley Green.
I'm Travis Denning.
Hey, I'm Aaron Lewis.
Hey, it's Luke Bryan.
I'm Tim McGraw.
What's up? This is Ian Munsick.
Wyoming Hookin Huntin Outdoors.
Wyoming Hookin Huntin Outdoors is on your radio and on demand 24/7. Right inside the radio station's app, all you have to do is click the on-demand button. And when you click that on-demand button, every week you're going to hear information from our friends at Wyoming Game and Fish Department because they're the backbone of what the reason was that we wanted to start the show, is so that information could be provided and given to hunters and outdoor folk all throughout the area. And Janet Millick, you've been here from the beginning, and one of the things that we've talked about quite a little bit, because it's something that is affecting a lot of the herds in Wyoming, and that's the chronic wasting disease.
That's right, Drew. We have been concentrating a lot, the Game and Fish Department, on chronic wasting disease in cervids. So deer, elk, moose in Wyoming, to really try and make sure that the public is aware of what we're trying to do on management of CWD, which right now is just learning more about the disease on the ground. And so with us today, we have quite a few of the experts here in the Casper region. So we have Matt Huizinga, who is our Douglas District wildlife biologist, which kind of is pretty important for us here in Casper because we did a lot of our testing in that area. We have Justin Binfit, who is our wildlife management coordinator. So he oversees the entire Casper region, which, as you know, goes clear from Sundance down to Lusk and over to Douglas and back to Casper. And then we have our statewide kind of chronic wasting disease expert, who is the laboratory supervisor for our wildlife health lab out of Laramie, Hank Edwards.
Guys, we do appreciate you coming on, and any information that you can give us today, I think, is going to help a lot of folks. There were a lot of samples taken, Hank, and really it's great that everybody was participating and giving those samples in.
Right. So last year we collected a total of, 6,702 samples. That was from all species and all categories. So in other words, those that were taken by hunters, those that were collected by agency personnel, and then road kills, we looked at those as well. So that is almost exactly, maybe just a touch less than we surveyed in 2021. So yeah, a really good survey this year.
That's an amazing amount of people that are helping us in this program. And so just a huge thanks to all of those hunters who have really made the effort. So 6,702 people made an effort to get us a sample from their deer or elk or moose.
When did you guys start looking at the samples that were coming in? I mean, did you start looking as soon as they started coming in?
Yep, we start analyzing as soon as those arrive in the laboratory. And generally, we can turn those around in about a week once they get here. So, we've already analyzed all the tissue samples that were collected last fall. And now we're just starting to go back and look at the data and how CWD is affecting some of our herds.
Does the numbers that you have collected over this year compare to 2021 as far as what you're seeing?
They do compare. We're starting to see more positives this year than maybe we saw last year. That's a trend we've been seeing over the last 10 years where CWD slowly increases each year. But last year we saw just a little bit more of a bump in the number of positives than we've seen previously.
Are you seeing a lot of the positives more from one certain area, or is it just statewide that the positive results are coming back?
That's a good question. We certainly have a few areas in the state where we see more positives, but for the most part, I can say that almost all the state has got some level of CWD. So really, we're getting those positives from all over the state.
Do you see a species that has a higher rate of the CWD, or are they pretty equal?
Certainly, both mule deer and whitetail deer, we see a higher incidence of CWD than we do in a lot of our elk herds. Most of our elk herds, the prevalence is low, so around 5%. Although we do have some elk herds that are approaching 15 or 16%, but for the most part, elk are much lower prevalence than both our mule deer and whitetail deer.
Do we see the CWD in antelope at all?
We don't. We only see CWD in the cervids, so that's mule deer, whitetail deer, elk, moose. We don't see it in bighorn sheep or pronghorn or any of those other species.
How did the moose samples look? There's only a fewer amount of those that have probably been turned in, but does it look like it's high too?
We actually sample quite a few moose every year, and to date we've only had one positive moose in the state, and that was way back in I think about 2008. And we've not had another positive moose since then. Colorado sees more positive moose in hunter-killed animals, but we just haven't seen that yet.
Drew, just to take a moment to point out to listeners, all of this information that Hank is talking about is posted on our website. You can go to the Wildlife in Wyoming tab and scroll down towards the bottom, and there will be a button that talks about wildlife health and disease. And if you click on that, that'll start taking you through some of the chronic wasting disease information. And they have great heat maps that talk a little bit and show viewers where, maybe CWD is concentrated a little bit more heavy in other areas as far as the prevalence of the animals. So just kind of keep in mind all of that.
Matt, you were out on the ground most of the last season, and since we are in a mandatory check station area, how did everybody respond to giving in samples?
Yeah, so this was the first year we'd used the mandatory sampling in this area. The biggest challenge we had was just getting the word out to the public on the mandatory sampling. So non-residents where they're applying for the area, it was pretty easy to get a list and email those out, send information to them. And the biggest thing we had was with residents with a general hunt area, we have no way of knowing who's going to be hunting the area. So we tried to utilize different methods, try to get the word out and let people know where they could get their sample taken, where we'd be at, and try to make it as easy as possible. And I ran a check station most of our deer season and had really good success with it. We got way more samples than we ever have in the area, and most hunters were really happy to help. There's a few that were a little upset that they didn't know about it or didn't want to stop as usual, but for the most part, it went really well, I thought.
How long of a stop is it when they stop in to see you from the time they pull up to the time they pull away?
It really depends. Sometimes we can get backed up, but if there's just one person there, usually they're in and out 5 or 10 minutes. It's not a big deal. We get done pretty quick.
Do you foresee that more people, if they know about it, will not have a problem with stopping in just from what you've collected?
Yeah, the more we get the word out, the more people know about it. We have people that were coming to the check station specifically just to come get the samples taken. And so they were really good about wanting to seek us out and get their sample done and move on. So.
Drew, sometimes it can actually be the opposite. Sometimes when we set up a presence and have a bunch of sampling in an area, then we create an expectation that we're going to be there every year. And we get some folks that, oh, hey, you guys weren't there this year. Where were you? Well, the truth is we kind of have limited manpower and resources, and we have to focus, strategically in some herds in some years, and we can't be everywhere every year. So for the most part, though, folks are pretty happy to accommodate us.
What do you guys do in a check station stop like that? I mean, are you taking the sample there if they want, or are they just giving it in or sending it in?
Yeah, at the check station, we kind of do everything. We look at licenses, make sure everything matches up. Basically, any kind of harvest data we can get, we collect at that check station. And with the CWD sample, we'll take everything there and we'll submit it for them. And all they have to do is look up the results on their account online.
Awesome. Matt, Janet, Justin, Hank, hang on just a second. We're going to take a quick break and back more with Wyoming Game and Fish Department about chronic wasting disease on Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.
It's Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.
And we're back, Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors, with our friends at Wyoming Game and Fish Department talking CWD, chronic wasting disease. Hank is from the state lab. And Hank, how long does it take you guys to go through some of these samples?
Well, it's both tough as well as time consuming. How's that for an answer for you? So there's 8 of us that work in the laboratory during CWD testing season, and it really is a huge flurry of activity. So the test itself is an ELISA test where we just take a couple tissue sections from each lymph node and run that through the ELISA test. The ELISA test itself only takes 4 to 6 hours, but all the data entry and the tissue processing and everything else makes it so when we have an army of 8 people, we can test somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 samples a day. It all depends on if the wheels stay on the cart, but for the most part, we can crank through as many samples as like I said, 300 to 500 a day.
And you're doing that throughout from September all the way to February?
Our busiest times are the 1st of February, the 15th of February. Early November, we'll have a few big crunch days, and then even into the 15th of November. After that, our testing really starts to drop off. And as you can imagine, early in the season, we're testing mostly deer. Later in the season, we're testing mostly elk. So we start right around the 1st of September, and we'll wrap up with most of our testing by the end of January.
When you guys finish up, you have over 6,000 samples. Are they discarded? Is it is it kept for future reference?
Oh, we're incredible hoarders when it comes to tissue samples. So we save all of our tissue samples. We have a large freezer, and so we have the last 6 or 7 years of surveillance tissues, and those are all saved back. So we'll keep those for research purposes. For instance, if we wanted to go back and look at those lymph nodes and see how many deer or elk may have been exposed to COVID, we could actually analyze those tissue samples and determine that. So we keep them as long as we can until essentially we've run out of room.
So as we're to the point of the year where we'll be setting the seasons for the upcoming year, how do you guys feel check stations will be in 2023?
In regards to chronic wasting disease, the wildlife management coordinators and biologists across the state are currently in the process of setting up those areas. And here in the Casper region, both Justin and Matt can talk a little bit more about that. But looking at the numbers, we try to get 200 samples in each area before we move on. And so looking at what we're facing for the next year could be interesting.
Yeah, Drew. So we'll be kind of, like I said earlier, it's kind of a traveling road show in terms of we select different herds in different years for our, kind of redoubling our surveillance efforts in those areas. So, in part, thanks to a large part to mandatory sampling, like over in the Douglas country, we will probably continue to sample there again next year, but we probably will not have the need for mandatory sampling. So that's just to augment that sample size to get us up and over that 200 mark that Janet was talking about. And we did really, really well on elk in the Laramie Range, so probably won't need to do anything there for the next few years. We'll continue some efforts up in the Black Hills. And we may actually be looking at pulling some samples in a deer herd north of Casper and Glenrock.
The obvious thing is, though, that every year some people can submit their own sample. It doesn't have to be in a mandatory area. If you want to help these studies, then submitting is the best way to go.
We've always committed to the public, and will continue to do so, that we'll test any of your harvested animals that you want. So we do get a fair amount of folks that bring us their animal for testing because they have they want to know if the animal tests positive or not before they consume it. So we do get folks that bring that in just unsolicited. But, for our purposes, as we move around and we're trying to meet these sample goals that's where we're really focusing our efforts there. And that's where we're going to ask the public to kind of go above and beyond and help us bring samples in.
Janet, when is it in April that the seasons will be set? Is it the 17th?
17th and 18th of April, all of the seasons will be set. But we will have this information out to the public by June 1st. We'll have all of our brochures made that talk about which areas are going to be our focal areas, which areas in the state might be mandatory. And so all of the CWD information will be out by June 1st. And that just gives our managers a little bit of extra time after season setting to really make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And we'll have that information out to the public then. And in addition to that, across the state, keep your eyes out, because a lot of different areas across the state will do little trainings for the public where they can bring, hunters or outfitters in and really teach them how to do some of the sampling. It can be a little bit gnarly because oftentimes we're working on roadkill deer or something along those lines. So bring your nose plug as well. But it really is a great opportunity to kind of figure out if you want to take the sample yourself, so that you can submit it. And we, have some requirements along with that we suggest you hold on to your carcass a little bit longer, just so in case you're like me and you can't take the sample correctly, you want to make sure that you can go back and actually get the right lymph node. But, things like that are going to be, interesting to the public, and keep your eyes out across the state, and hopefully we can learn more.
Well, it sure has been a very interesting year, and of course, we're really, really close, just a week away from the season setting in Wyoming, and CWD is going to be around for a while, and it's cool to see all the people that have contributed to help the research.
Thank you to all the hunters that participate in our chronic wasting disease monitoring and surveillance program. It's huge for us. It helps us on the science end. It helps us look at the herd health. And that is really what we're concerned about, is making sure that all of our deer, elk, and moose in Wyoming are doing good, and maybe in the future look at some management actions that may help us control chronic wasting disease.
Awesome. Janet, Mac, Justin, and Hank, thank you guys so much. And we're looking forward to hearing how the commission meetings go and what the seasons are going to be like, especially with the heck of a winter that we have had and the impact it's had on a lot of the wildlife here in Wyoming. We continue with Wyoming Game and Fish in just a bit with Brian from Rocky Mountain Discount Sports.
It's Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.
And welcome back to Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors. Welcome in Brian from Rocky Mountain Discount Sports. And Brian, this week has been a little different. And Brian, there were a couple of interesting days thanks to that big snow we just got.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it wasn't a day off that we could do anything fun. We were all shoveling snow.
Yeah, no kidding. My back kind of sore after the last couple of days. And with the snowfall this late in the year, people should know that you're still selling things like snowshoes and whatnot.
Yeah, it's amazing how late in the season that we're still selling muck boots and danners and bog boots and snowshoes. I mean, all that kind of stuff that you think that this time of year we'd pretty much be done with. It was still pretty popular.
It's just a couple of years ago that big snowstorm came through in March, but a snowstorm this size in April, man, that's kind of wild.
Yeah, obviously the most snow that we've seen in the area for a long time. But, I guess if we have something to be thankful for is that, the trees weren't all leaving out. And I remember a few years back we had a big, heavy, wet snow kind of like this, but the trees had been leaving out and budding out, and man, it just took down all kinds of trees across town.
Now, we've talked over the last few weeks about how we're going to have lots of water, and the fishing's going to be pretty good on high water years like this.
Talking to the Game and Fish and the powers that be, they're predicting pretty much every one of our reservoirs is going to be full again. So even Pathfinder, that's, had kind of a record low season last year. And typically when that happens, the fishing tends to be fantastic, on those high water years. So, lots to look forward to. And I think within the next 2 weeks, we're going to see, quite a few reservoirs opening up.
Brian, it was just a couple of months ago, you went to a show in Dallas. And since we're going to have such a great fishing year this year, when you were at that show, are there any kind of products or product lines that really jump out at you as a new product on the market that you guys are going to carry?
You know, almost every one of the manufacturers out there has something new, right? You know, Berkeley, Pure Fishing, they came out with a new crankbait called the Money Badger that seems pretty cool. There's a bunch of different plastics and that kind of stuff that are out there. And so, I mean, everybody always has their new colors, a little bit, you know, new and improved 2.0 versions of everything. We're kind of excited. We've got a new line of rain gear coming in. So, you know, if we have a wet spring, kind of like we've had a really wet winter, you know, a good set of rain gear is probably going to be really important.
You know, Brian, you talk about rain gear, but I've heard stories that we may not be out of the snow clear yet. We may get another bout of snow. And you've talked in the past about making sure that you have your supplies on the boat, dry clothes and dry bags, and your camping gear to have the dry bag so that you're really prepared for anything that comes about. And that's one of the great things about Rocky Mountain Discount Sports is you guys are a sporting goods store, but not the kind of sports like baseball and things.
Right. Yeah, we're definitely not the ball sport kind of place. You know, we do have tennis balls for the dog, but you know, yeah, it's time to kind of gear up for that kind of stuff. We've been talking about boat prep, and I went through my dry bag and I took all my stuff out so it would air out. And, you know, I noticed I had, you know, some knit gloves in there, and I've got a beanie and some warm, you know, like hats and that kind of stuff, and just kind of stuff that you would normally layer up for in those spring months. So now's a good time to get it washed, get it cleaned, get it ready for the next season.
Yeah, and hopefully that season very, very, very soon. Of course, if you ever have any questions, you can hit us up in the radio station's app. And if you have needs that you may wonder if Rocky Mountain Discount Sports has, rocky-mountain-sports.com. Their new website is up and running, and you can find out all the things that they carry, whether it's for camping, outdoor clothing or footwear, fishing, hunting, whatever you need in the outdoors, they've got you covered at Rocky Mountain Discount Sports. Stop on in and see them, CY Avenue in Casper, or online, rocky-mountain-sports.com. We continue Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors with Brian in just a bit as we talk spring fishing and what it's looking like.
It's Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.
And welcome back. It's Drew along with Brian Woodward from Rocky Mountain Discount Sports. And Brian, we've been talking and hoping that we were about to be able to get out on the water and do some fishing. And really our dreams and hopes were dashed a little bit last week with that big snowstorm.
Yeah, you know, a lot of us had just gotten the snow off our boat covers, you know, from last week. Now we're doing it again. So yeah, it's anxiously awaiting to get that boat on the water.
With fishing season just around the corner and flooding season possible, high waters, we talked just a minute ago, touched on it very quickly anyway, about the high water and why there's such good fishing years. Is there a reason behind that? Is it the fact that the water is spread to areas that it hasn't been, so maybe feeding is a little better?
Well, in reservoirs like Pathfinder, you know, with the low water years, you know, a lot of those trees and bushes and that kind of stuff have seeded onto the low water shoreline. So as those things start growing and the water comes up, it gives more space for minnows and the bug hatch and that kind of stuff. So it adds a little more forage to the water. So those fish tend to feed a little bit more. They grow a little bit faster. So that definitely helps with you know, this water level kind of conditions.
Do you fish them any differently than you would normally? I mean, obviously they're hungry either way.
Yeah, you know, I mean, rule of thumb for me, especially for walleye fishing, is that when the water's rising, you fish shallow, and when the water's dropping, you know, the fish, I think, kind of panic and they drop a little bit deeper. So again, trusting your electronics. If you're not seeing them out there in 15 to 20 feet, you know, fish shallow. Sometimes you can't see them up shallow, but, you know, grab that rod and pitch up shallow and see what happens.
When you're thinking about where to go fishing for the day, I know you like to go to Glendo and some people like to go to Pathfinder, even up to Keyhole, but Keyhole didn't have the winter we had and may not have the water levels. So does that factor into where you're deciding to go? Maybe the lower leveled reservoirs aren't your game?
No, I mean, I think your guy just has to kind of be comfortable with where they're at and what they're doing. You know, some of the reservoirs like Keyhole maybe don't see as big a fluctuation in water levels as Glendo and Pathfinder do. maybe the repeated history of where you're going to find fish throughout the year are the same, whereas there might be a little different at Glendo. So if a water level is 10 feet higher this same time as it was last year, you have to kind of think about transitions and what the fish are doing, what the shoreline looks like, where maybe a new gravel bed or a new flat spot might be, where maybe the fish would be moving to spawn, where maybe before they were down shoreline, another 20 feet vertical feet of water. So and then with the runoff and that kind of stuff, you have to kind of look at just the conditions in general. We've talked about, with this runoff that's going to be happening, we're going to see a lot of muddy water, a lot of stained water, which typically is good, especially in the spring, because that muddy water tends to warm up a little quicker. So once you find that water temperature where maybe the fish are spawning, that 50, 55 degree water temp, typically, like, you might find that maybe the surface of the water is actually muddy, but watch your electronics. Sometimes you can see the difference where the mud is only going down 3 to 5 feet, so you can feel a little more comfortable fishing in that stained water.
Last year we were a little bit low on Glendo and Pathfinder, some of these reservoirs, and when it comes to spawning, the fish usually go back to the same spots, but with the fact that there's water expanding and will be higher this year, will they still try to go back to the same areas, or will they explore new opportunities?
I think they're, for the most part, a creature of habit, and they tend to follow current a little bit. So, a reservoir like Glendo, there's definitely some main lake spawners. There's certain areas of the south end of that lake that has some good gravel beds and some rock structures, and some areas that definitely will hold those spawning fish. They don't all, migrate upriver into the current, but there will be some fish that will migrate, probably all the way up to the power plant.
A couple of months ago, you were talking about maybe exploring new places to fish, and one of those places was near the power plant. Now, is that an option for fishing, or are there obstacles that kind of get in the way there?
Sometimes that particular part of the river doesn't have the depth of it to really hold walleyes for any length of time. So, we used to hit the Miracle Mile quite a bit this time of year, and it's fantastic trout fishing, especially this time of year. A lot of drift boats, you got to kind of work around them a little bit, but we would just kind of look for some deeper pools. So, as those fish were coming out of Pathfinder, a lot of times they'd run upriver a little bit, and then you just kind of find pockets and structure and shorelines that would be conducive to spawning walleyes, and where they can, feel safe without, thinking that the water is going to drop and just leave them up on shore. Right. So, really just get out and throw a line. That's the best way. Just experience and see what you're seeing, where you're catching fish, and, you're going to be successful catching something probably.
What about if the water is muddy? I mean, that obviously changes the game a little bit as well. I mean, are you going for a certain kind of color or a certain kind of bait to kind of combat the color of the water?
Yeah, this time of year, it's a lot of guys are running a jig and a minnow, just a kind of a standard basic presentation. Sometimes they want it moved fast. Sometimes they just want that minnow drug across the bottom. There's no reason why a guy can't pitch a crankbait, pull cranks, troll them, whatever you want to do. With the muddy water, sometimes the worm bite tends to get pretty good. When that runoff starts hitting, rising up on that shoreline, a lot of times those bugs get washed into the river. So, even floating a worm down those, can be productive.
What about the color game? Are you looking at certain colors?
It's one of those things, you see whatever the fish like that day, right? So a lot of times, I like running just a chartreuse, jig head just to start, throwing a minnow on it and seeing what happens. And as I'm fishing, watching my graph and see if I'm seeing more fish or if they're active, not active. Hopefully you get a bite, you find out, okay, well, they want it a little bit slower, or no, they want it popped a little bit, or sometimes you just got to drag it. So just kind of paying attention to what's going on. But I tend to like the chartreuse colors to start and then kind of mix it up from there.
We're just a couple of weeks away from the Tough Man, which is on the 29th of April. And then the Wyoming Walleye Stampede is just a couple of weeks after that. And during these tournaments, people come from all over. They come from South Dakota and Nebraska and Colorado. Do you feel at this stage, with the water levels and everything we're going through right now, will the typical fishermen that live here in Wyoming and always on the water have an advantage? or will people be kind of in the same boat?
I think everybody's going to be up in the air. I mean, we're not sure what the water is going to do. We're not sure when the ice is going to come off. So we're not sure what the water temperature is, what the water clarity is. Those fish move. I mean, obviously a guy that lives in the area that's on the lake more often might have more of an advantage, but, yeah, I mean, certain reservoirs like Alcova, that one opens up fairly quick. And the Tough Man tournament, a lot of guys run up the canyon hoping for one of those big spawning females that goes up. But, there's a lot of people that fish the main lake because there's main lake spawners on Alcova as well. And, it pays for the largest trout too. So, I mean, you're going to have some guys that are out there just walleye fishing. You're going to have some guys just out trolling the middle of the lake hoping for a big brown and cash in on the largest trout pot.
So there's definite options, and hopefully we don't see any more snow like we just saw that really delays it anymore. And everybody's chomping at the bit, especially to get out on the lakes and the river to do some fishing and get into these tournaments. The Tough Man coming at the end of April, but then the Wyoming Walleye Stampede is in the first part of May. And if folks are looking to get into that tournament, how can they reach out and get in contact with you to have an application filled out and enter?
Well, the WyomingWalleyeStampede.com is our website, and they can download the application and the brochure from there. They can also stop in at Rocky Mountain Discount Sports, and they can pick up an application we have there on the counter with the rest of our literature, or they can just give us a call.
All righty. Thanks again. Rocky Mountain Discount Sports been a big part of this show. Brian, thank you so much. And the new website is up, rocky-mountain-sports.com. All kinds of information, and you can find out anything and everything that you need to know about Rocky Mountain Discount Sports right there on the brand new website. All right, Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors will continue. We obviously had a little snow this week, so it kind of threw off our scheduling of guests. But we're going to look back at one of our previous guests, Scotty McCreery.
It's Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.
It's Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors. I am your host, Drew Kirby. Thank you so much for tuning in. So we're going to look back on our very first guest on this program way back last year, Scotty McCreery, country music artist, American Idol winner. So without further ado, we look back with Scotty McCreery. Scotty, I got to tell you, I'm sorry that I haven't been following on Instagram.
Dude, it's A-okay. I'm rarely on there anyway, so it's no worries.
Hey, you got some new music coming out that just a couple of months ago, I was talking to someone in your office and said it may be the best Scotty McCreery music that has ever hit the airwaves.
Oh, my goodness. They're really setting the bar. I guess we got to try and make that happen, but we're excited about it. We've had 3 years to work on it and more time than ever, honestly, to pick up a guitar and write songs and stuff. So I've been listening to it for a while, just by myself in the truck and on planes and stuff. So I'm just excited to share it with everybody.
Listening to some of the songs that you already have out, you get very personal when you go into your songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically where I write all my songs from. It's just personal experience, and it's what I know, what I love, what I feel. Some people can pull stuff out of thin air and write an amazing song. That's not me. I gotta live it. So you'll find that a lot with my stuff for sure.
When you're out cracking cold cans and casting the line in the water, man, there's nothing better than a good fishing day.
Oh, dude, absolutely. We just got back from Alaska as well, and boy, oh boy, did we do that. We fished all day and night because it's light outside until 11, 12 o'clock. So caught ourselves some big king salmon, and it was a trip of a lifetime.
Now, have you ever been out here to Wyoming to do any fishing?
I've been out to Wyoming. Normally, it's just for shows, though, and I love that area of the country. I mean, you can't beat it. So I'd love to get out there, hunt, fish, all that good stuff, and fly fish. I love to fly fish, too. And to me, it's a little better than just sitting on the dock bass fishing and stuff because you're actually, constantly in motion and constantly doing something,
Well, good news. We are one of the number one destinations for trout fishing in the world. People love to come to Casper, Wyoming to do some fishing, and we invite you to come on out and see us anytime you're in the area.
be there in a heartbeat to show me the honey holes.
Well, Scotty, man, thank you so much, and we look forward to the same truck hitting shelves everywhere on the 17th of September, and going to be huge. And we look for big things from Scotty. And fishing wise, come out and see us.
Hey, I'll be there, man. Can't wait for y'all to hear the music, and we'll get some good fishing in here soon, man. Appreciate it.
Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors with Drew Kirby. If you have a question, want to make a comment, or have an idea for a show topic, message us on the My Country mobile app. Wyoming Hookin and Huntin Outdoors.